Let's go now to our daily political panel. Andrea Bragg is a Liberal Senator. Matt Thistlethwaite is a member for the Labor Party. They both join me. Thanks for your time, gentlemen.
G'day.
G'day, Tom.
Why don't we start with industrial relations? The final big reveal was on the boot, the Better Off Overall test, which can be sidelined effectively for a period of 2 years, or agreements for each, so the agreements could go longer than that. Are you going to be honest with workers? So you're saying business is not in a good position, we want to have as many people in jobs as possible. Some workers might be worse off as a result.
Well, the idea of rebooting enterprise bargaining is very important. I mean, we actually believe that enterprise bargaining gives workers a better deal because it's got to be above the award conditions. And of course, enterprise bargaining has been killed by the courts and killed by the Fair Work Commission's approach to interpreting enterprise agreements. So making that simpler and making that, or bringing that back to life is actually quite important.
But when you say we believe it gives workers better conditions, this allows for the opposite.
Well, there'll still be a better off overall test, but we're trying to simplify it and make it easier so that it can actually get a few agreements through the Fair Work Commission, which I have to say has done its best to try and slow down the growth of enterprise agreements.
But the Better Off Overall test won't have to always be applied over the next 2 years. That's the change here.
There is a timetable on that because there is a thing called the coronavirus recession, where there has been flexibility during the last 9 or 10 months for businesses that are facing what is the most serious economic disruption.
But that hasn't sidelined the boot. That's still been in place.
Well, the boot should be simplified.
Yeah, but simplifying is different to being able to sideline it for a couple of years.
But if you're looking at temporary measures for 2 years so that you can have an economic recovery, that's different from a structural reform to the boot. I mean, I think we should...
No, I understand that, and in time, it's rigid. A lot of people say it's rigid, but I'm just asking this period, are you going to be upfront enough to say, we'll have more people in jobs, some workers might be worse off, overall workers will be better off?
What we're saying is we want to create more jobs, and at the moment workplaces need more flexibility than they would usually have.
Okay. That is true of COVID. I mean, this hit has not ended on the economy. We don't know what exactly will happen with the vaccine. Employers are struggling, aren't they?
Well, Tom, you've got the Treasurer saying that the economy is recovering and is in good shape, and then you've got the IR Minister saying the economy is not in good shape and we need these laws. I mean, which one is it? We can't agree to a set of laws that are going to see Australian workers worse off, and that's what this reform allows. It allows, as you say, the Better Off Overall test to be sidelined so that someone could be put into an enterprise agreement where they've had their pay and conditions reduced compared to the national employment standards and the award. And that's not fair, particularly given that it's been a lot of essential workers that have worked hard during this period to get us through. This is the thanks that they get from the government. Thank you for getting us through COVID. We're now going to introduce laws that allow us to cut your pay and conditions. It's not fair.
Do you think it's likely or would even apply to nurses, for example?
Well, the way it's drafted, it can apply to anyone, any workplace, so long as there is agreement with the workers. And that's the problem that you'll find in non-union workplaces, that employers will be able to force this onto employees because of the power imbalance and get this through. And that's why we think it's not a good reform.
But just on what business is doing as well. You spoke about the workers. Do you have sympathy for bosses during COVID as they try to recover, as they have challenging conditions? Some of them, for example, will still be restricted on square metre rules. It could be all of next year. Do you understand their plight?
Of course we want to see businesses recover, and that's why Labor worked in a bipartisan manner with the government through COVID to put in place a lot of the measures that have ensured that businesses could survive.
I'm talking about through next year. We can't exactly have JobKeeper for a whole year next year. That's not affordable.
And the union movement and the Labor Party worked with the government on changes to flexibilities for awards around working from home and remote working and the like. But what we're not going to be involved in is laws that will see workers lose wages and conditions. And I spoke to a group of aged care workers yesterday, Tom. They are overworked, underpaid, they're tired. Many of them are working 2 jobs. They feel like they can't join a union because they're scared, and now they're going to be hit with these sort of laws where they could be worse off. That's not fair.
What did you tell them? That you can join a union? There's nothing to be scared of, is there?
Yeah, I did. Of course I did. You can join.
Why were they scared of joining a union?
Because there's a lot of people in Australia that are scared if they join a union and they speak up for their rights that they might be dismissed. And that's the reality of a lot of workplaces.
Can't happen.
It's illegal, yes,
right.
I know. It's illegal, but that's an impression that a lot of workers have, unfortunately.
Cashless welfare card. The government, in the end, had to back down. There's an ongoing trial for 4 regions across Australia. Would this be the sort of thing that should be across Australia? I mean, you're a senator for New South Wales. If this works well in these communities, wouldn't it work well everywhere?
Well, I travel around my state, and I've just come back from the Central West, where I've been to towns like Burke and Brewarrina and Coonamble, where I've met with majority majority Indigenous communities. And these are the sort of issues that I would be happy to raise with them next time I go back. I think it would be a mistake to see this as a reform which is designed for any particular Australian, but given how much of the opposition's rhetoric has been around presenting this card as something that is focused on Indigenous Australians, I think that, given you've asked me what I would do in my role, it is something that I will take back and ask people in Redfern, people in La Perouse, people in the Central West, whether or not this would be a reform that they would like to see in their communities. I think it's got to be driven by the communities.
Well, but what does that mean exactly? Do they get a vote on it? Does the community of Ceduna get a vote on it, or Bundaberg? Is it the people that... How does that work?
Well, it's community consultation, and you can speak to elders, you can speak to land councils, you can speak to community leaders in non-Indigenous communities. You can do all sorts of consultative mechanisms to determine whether or not that is a card that people think would improve people's lives on the ground. I mean, Australia is a big country, communities are different. My sense is it's a good option to have if people want it.
So you think it should be a community by community a view on whether they have it or not, and if they agree they get it? So is that what, per electorate, per town? How does that work, and how do you assess community sentiment?
Well, I mean, I formed a strong view that a lot of the policy that we do in Canberra isn't sufficiently grounded in communities, and I think that we can do more community engagement.
But how do you gauge that? Is it anecdotal? You go around and you say, I've been here, most people love it, we're rolling it out.
Well, there's a system that the department can put in place through the executive government to formalise that, but you're asking me my view
what system?
how I would do it.
I'm just not quite sure. You're saying there's some sort of vote. How do you formalise sort of sentiment and say...
Well, I mean, ultimately, the people that are elected to this place have to make a judgment they're prepared to go and argue for in the public square,
Right.
Tom. But I think that the consultation that you can do on the ground across our country on measures like this is a very important part of it. So if you're asking me what I would do, I would be consulting widely and determining whether or not there is an interest in having this measure.
I understand your
I
point.
think it's
I'm
an
just not
important
sure how that works. I'm not sure how you're saying that works. How do you know community sentiment? What if it's
Because
right?
you go out to communities and meet with them. You get out of the Canberra bubble,
Sure.
and you go and meet with
Yeah, I
people.
understand that, but how do you then go, right, this community is 52-48, they're for it?
Well, as I said, ultimately the people that are elected to this place have got to be able to stand up and make judgments and defend them in the public square.
So would
They
each...
should be informed by a range of evidence, including meeting with people.
So what happens? Each local MP comes back and says, my community's for it, someone else says mine's against it, and that's how you roll out the scheme?
Well, why not?
Well, I don't know. Is that how you'd say it could work?
Why not? I think there's a lot of people in this place that are well connected to their communities and they could help us.
What do you think of that idea, Matt?
Well, we don't support it. There's no evidence that this card works, and that's the big issue with it. There have been several evaluations and studies, and there's no clear evidence that it produces the outcomes for which the government introduced it, and that is to try and reduce alcohol and drug dependence, to try and improve health outcomes in particular communities. And that was highlighted by the member for Bass in her speech to the House of Representatives, where she said that she didn't support it. It's a little disappointing that she didn't go and vote that way, but there's no evidence that it works, and unless there's evidence that it works, we won't support it.
Well, that's the key bit. So the government's being pushed now by Rex Patrick. Empirical evidence he wants, for example, in Ceduna within his state. If that comes back, would Labor look at the evidence and be open to supporting it if it has really good benefits for, say, children, abuse rates, domestic violence, gambling rates?
Well, when the legislation was introduced, we consulted with communities, and the view of communities was that this was a punitive measure and it wasn't necessary. And then that was backed up by the evaluations and the evidence. So I don't think that we will be taking that approach.
Hang on, so you said we need the evidence. If the evidence comes, it's still a no. Is that what you're saying?
Well, because the evidence has come. The evidence has been through the evaluations that have been made. And I've read some of them. One of them was from the University of New South Wales in my electorate. And they came to the conclusion that the card didn't work.
But there has been different studies done, different levels of evidence. I'm talking about something comprehensive that drills into what it's supposed to do, as you mentioned, around crime, around gambling, around abuse and so on. If the government actually does something comprehensive, would Labor at least be open to looking at that?
Well, the government would have to present something to us, and of course we'll consider something in the future.
So you are open to evidence?
No, I'm not going to say that I'm open to something.
But open to looking at evidence?
Well, we always assess programs on the evidence, but at the moment the evidence is that it doesn't work, and on that basis Labor has decided to vote against it, and I can't see that changing.
Okay, well, we will see. Just wanted to get you finally on a couple of topics each. First of all, on returning Australians. Have we had a clear explanation in the wake of the Holton report from the government, while more detention centres haven't been able to be opened up for returning Australians and massively bolster the number that are coming here?
Well, as you know, the choke point has been hotel quarantine.
So open up the detention centres?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's something that I'm sure that is under consideration, but
Well, hang on, it's December 10. It's just still under consideration.
But I mean, as you know, the whole idea of getting people back by Christmas was when there was about 30,000 people on the list. Now, those people are back, the lists have grown. I mean, things do change. It is a pretty fluid situation.
They do, but you've got to be changing with them. These numbers have been creeping up since September, and you've got international students you need to get back.
Yeah, well, I know that they're working hard to try and make this happen.
Okay. Labor on this is saying everyone back by February and then international students. Do you have any sympathy for example, New South Wales? It wants a separate intake for international students. It's taken a lot of Australians back, more than any other state, and it wants this crucial $40 billion industry to restart.
Yeah, I can understand why the New South Wales government does want students to return to Australia. They've been an important part of our economic development. But the priority has to be getting Australians back from overseas that are stranded, and there's 37,000 of them at the moment. The Prime Minister gave a commitment they'd be back by Christmas. I don't think we're going to get anywhere near that. So we're saying that they should be back by February, and they should look at things like opening detention centres. They should look at working with the airlines to reduce the costs for some passengers on these things. All of these things are achievable if the government shows some leadership. I
think there were 26,000 when the PM made that pledge. I don't know if it's quite an ironclad promise, but I'm happy to just put that by the side. 43,000, I think, are back since then. So they've more than achieved the number, so the list has grown.
Well, they made the commitment, and that was to get these people back by Christmas. It's a broken commitment in our view, because that's the number one role of government, to look after Australians and allow them safe passage back to their homeland, and they haven't been able to do that because they really haven't shown that leadership about reducing some of those choke points in the system around the quarantining and around the airlines and their behaviour.
Well, the choke points were largely hotel quarantine, and the Victorian government's disaster meant that the second biggest city has been offline for months and months.
We've said that the solution is to look to open some of the detention centres. They're purpose-built facilities such as this. That could solve that problem.
All right. We're not going to solve any more problems now because we're out of time. I didn't mean to end on that note, but anyway, enjoy your break, gentlemen. We'll talk again soon. Andrew Bragg,
Thanks,
Thistlethwaite, talking there. We are going to take a break. When we come back, the Home Affairs Minister forced to withdraw a comment branding the Greens leader enemy of the state. We'll speak to that leader next. Stay with us.
The greatest gift that we can give our kids is an education.
Sky News follows the journey of 5 Indigenous students on scholarships.
Who people are and who they want to be can be so